The ink has barely dried, signing off in the midseason brawl, and we're already turning the page back here for Phase 2 of the 2018 Heroes Global Championship. I'm Gillyweed, here to lead you through the role changes, the meta shifts, and the roster swaps. Oh my. And here joining me is Jay Howe. As always, Jay Howe, excited to be back?
Super excited, especially after what we just saw from EU. It means the excitement is rolling back after midseason brawl, so hopefully we get a little bit of that action here today.
I'm really happy to be back. I'm so excited to go. I'm excited for these teams. Guys, there was so much that happened between Phase 1 and now for North America. In fact, we can just check out the standings. Of course, the standings were reset, but we are going to still be able to talk about some of the changes that have come in for North America. And, you know, we're going to talk a lot more about the teams and all of the different things that happened for them as we start to see them throughout the weekend. But as we take a look now, you're going to see a new name, that being Endemic. Endemic was Gale Force Esports, briefly Team DJ2, but there's a lot of hype behind this team, some of the changes that have happened for them. Also, what happened, LFM Esports and No Tomorrow, they defended their spot to the Crucible, though Jay Howe, touch and go there for a bit for No Tomorrow. But as we look at these teams and as we talk about everyone having a roster change except Heroes Hearth Esports and Team Freedom, which of these rosters is your most anticipated?
I'd say everybody's got their sights set on Endemic, and for good reason. I mean, Michael Udall leading the charge there. They've got the big name coming in, a lot of backing towards that. They bring in people like Cure and Dansky to come in there to man that backline. Michael Udall switching over there, and it's a team that people are rallying behind because they want to see them win. But then there's also another crowd that probably is tuning in for other reasons to see maybe if they fall on the other end of things. There's just so much build-up around that team that I think it's going to bring a lot of excitement in particular.
And they have some pretty cool jackets, too.
Yeah, I want one.
So do I.
Paul George is my size, by the way. So, I mean, he might be like an inch or two taller, but I'm pretty sure I could fit if he wants to just send me his own. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I bet you would. Let's look at today's schedule while we get that figured out for you, Jay Howe. In case you missed Europe, Team Liquid won 3-1 versus Monkey Menagerie, and then Zealots losing to Leftovers. Leftovers starting off the phase with a win has got to feel really good for this team that had to go through the Crucible themselves and defend their spot. Later on, we're going to see a grudge match, because I have never in my 3 years of casting said Michael Udall takes on Akaface. That's a new one with Endemic versus No Tomorrow. But first, we're going to start with Team Freedom taking on Simplicity. Jay Howe, initial thoughts on this match?
Yeah, you know, Simplicity was one of those teams where we see some role swaps of their own. They bring in Tiger JK to fill that role as Prismat went back over to former teammates that he's joined back on Octalus's. So K1 Pro going back to the ranged role alongside Hosty, who had a standout Phase 1.
Yes.
And now that combo back there for Simplicity looks super strong. And as you mentioned, Team Freedom didn't make any changes. They felt confident with what they had, which, you know, some people would wonder during the middle of Part 2, they stumbled a little bit. But as you and I have talked about off screen so far, is Team Freedom, when it came to playoffs, look like a much stronger team. So I think that when I look at their team in particular, meta-wise and things like that, I almost feel like this might be the meta for them to regain their former self that they had in the early part of this year.
And although Team Freedom didn't go through any roster changes, they did make a pretty significant role change, which is of Nasmus and Yoda. Yoda's going to go back to offlaning, which during his time on Superstars, he was pretty standout himself playing that role. He kind of revolutionized the Malthael during his time on that role. And what it does is allow Nasmus, who had to kind of weirdly swap when Maev was picked by them, he gets to go back into being in the 4-man, which is a lot better for him. As Zugrug is probably going to say when we hear from him in a little bit, easier for him to shot call from. But before we get to that and more in-depth analysis on this upcoming first match of NA, we're going to take a look at the global cheer bar. HGC Cheer is back. I'm sure you know about it. I'm sure you've been cheering, but keep it up because you guys are freaking awesome, man. Look at this. Already unlocking the Deadly Chaos Lizard and the winner mount. Gen G's got to be very happy about that one. But keep it up. Keep supporting your favorite teams. Very cool that we have this program back.
I absolutely love it. I mean, the fact that we get it again, I forgot about this because we were in Sweden. I'm like, wait a minute, I got to come back. I got to do it myself. You know, I wasn't able to kind of get involved that, but it's always good to kind of get that, play around with some things. But the little lizard guy, the Deadly Chaos, I don't even know what it's called. I just know it looks cool. So
you've been running around with it in the Nexus?
Yeah, you know, the other thing is like getting the sprays and everything like that.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's super cool. I remember last year I got certain teams, and then, you know, sometimes you kind of change allegiances, and I'm like, I'll still rep it, but I got another team that...
I'm a little partial.
No favorites.
No, I'm a little partial to the Gluck. I don't know why. I don't know why I would be. Let's check in with our teams for our first match. This is going to be Hosty speaking for Simplicity and Zugrug for Team Freedom.
I think that not making roster changes is a pretty big deal because whenever you replace one person or two, it takes a long time to regain the synergy that you had, which we won't have to do at the start of the phase this time. We struggled a bit during like the mid-half of phase 1, but I think we were just slow to adapt to Maiev meta. But by the end of the phase and the playoffs, I think we had a really good shot at making it to MSP. We just messed up a bit in the playoffs. We completely swapped Nasmus and Yoda. Yoda to offlane now and Nasmus to ranged because Nasmus took over a bigger part in the shot calling, and we figured it would be a lot easier for him to do that as a player in the rotation rather than offlaner. Last phase, we didn't have much difficulty when we played against Simplicity, and to me the roster seems very similar this phase, so I don't think that will be a hard matchup for us.
Leading up to the end of the last phase, I feel like as a team we improved a lot. However, with our current roles, we just felt like it wasn't quite enough to break into that top 2, top 3 area. So we felt like we needed to make a change. So with K1 and Zuna both wanting to make a change, it was natural that Zuna goes back to his offlane role, and it was very natural that K1 goes back to his range role. So when we were doing tryouts, there were a ton of great players, you know. Biggest factor was really just Zuna and K1 really wanting to make a role swap. So then we looked for a support, and just the standout support seemed to be Tiger. He just played really consistent, and he had that aggressive edge that our team really likes. So we're really gonna see against Freedom what kind of Freedom we're gonna get. If it's the Freedom that was arguably top 2 in NA for a while, or if it was the Freedom that was showing to be really struggling last phase. I guess we'll see.
Hosty alluded to the improvements that Simplicity made, simply hitting the grind and putting in the hours. But for Team Freedom, a lot of that was dealing with the aggression. And as Zugrug has talked about, dealing with the Maiev meta, which seemed to plague them through part 2. Now, how do you feel knowing that, seeing this role change for them?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part that was their weakness, is not having that frontline control and making this switch. And with Nasmus going over, if we look back to Team Freedom towards early summer, late summer last year, when I was preparing for BlizzCon and I'm watching all these reviews, Nasmus stood out to me pretty significantly, especially on that ranged role. So for him to go back there, this intrigues me quite a bit to see what type of impact he can have, because I would have put him up there with one of the top ranged roles going into BlizzCon last year, and a big reason for their success. But that was the double support meta. Then he started playing that double support role. And so I want to see him come back there. But we talk about the melee shift change, then all of a sudden we look over at Simplicity and kind of have the same thing where we heard a little bit from Hosty talking about Zuna going back to that melee role, an old role of his.
Yeah, and you told me in that interview, Zuna had even mentioned that he felt like he could have more of an impact on that old role of his, that offlane. And I want to caution that while nobody wants more to see Simplicity succeed than me, I love those guys. This is not the first time that Zuna has said those very words. We remember DreamHack Austin, where he was like, put me on a role that carries, and that's when we got the insane Kael'thas game. And he did. Don't get me wrong, he did. But he has to play safer. That is a role where you can't make mistakes. You have to stay alive. And I worry that if he's still involved in shot calling too, he might be getting a little over aggressive trying to make those plays happen. But I love the Tiger JK edition. I think he fits in really well with that aggressive nature of the team. And talking about aggression, we're going to look to get some team fights going, because looking at the Battleground pool and what our first map of NA HGC Phase 2 will be, Team Freedom's taking us to Sky Temple, Bans on Battlefield of Eternity, and Braxis Holdout.
No surprise for a team like Team Freedom, they love the macro game. They love to play around it. Infernal Shrines was their go-to. Sky Temple was up there for them as well. And if you can avoid a team fight against the team, as you said, that wants to be aggressive, if you look at Zuna's history, when he's on that role and he's shot calling, as you alluded to, it doesn't matter what level it is. It doesn't matter if you're ahead or behind. It doesn't matter if it's 4v5. He will go in with his team, and it is on at that point. There is no avoiding it.
Well, as we looked, we kind of glossed over the bans, but I do want to bring back to it for a second. If that's the case for Freedom, then this is a really heads-up ban to take out Battlefield of Eternity. That's something that it wasn't always a Freedom ban, but last part 2 of Phase 1, they did the same thing versus Simplicity. It always makes me chuckle to see Simplicity ban Braxis Holdout because that's a very Korean thing to do. And for forever, Azuna team always tries to follow some of that Eastern meta. So I think it just makes me chuckle to see that they're keeping that up with the Braxis ban. So consistent. I don't think they've banned a single different map all of Phase 1.
Well, Simplicity coming in here. Again, we talk about Freedom wanting to play around the global game, wanting to play around the macro game. And this is one of those ones where your offlaner, if you get ahead, gets even more value. And one of the best in the game is going to be the Dahaka. And right out of the gates, we see a first pick Abathur. Great on this map. You use the mule even, and you can keep this battleground going a little bit longer, but it also gives you clone targets, aggressive targets. And when we talk about Zuna, Gilly, anything is on the table.
I want to see Illidan.
Illidan,
yes.
yes.
That's all I care
Illidan,
about.
I mean, we talk about him going in. He played the Kerrigan a little bit last phase. He plays a little bit of everything. So there is anything on the board for this team.
Well, that's going to help quite a lot. Malfurion, either Twilight Dream can try to staunch some of that diving in, but especially Blaze with Bunker. And just to reiterate the patch that we're on, this is not the Blaze Bunker change just yet, so we're still looking at the 50-second cooldown.
You know I love macro strategies maps. As we see the Sonya coming in there, that will likely be Zuna's hero. You know I love the macro, and one of the changes that we did see that is on this patch is the XP distribution. It's no longer front-loaded in those fort walls, in those fort towers, and that was one thing that Team Freedom did better than anybody in North America, was to manipulate those rotations to get those early leads. And with that change, that being nerfed from 500 to 250 XP on each of those towers, it's far different now in the early game. So I'm really curious about how teams are going to approach that.
That also could be a huge difference with Abathur too, because you're looking at just trying to heal up the keep structures, which once you get to that point, then the game kind of changes, but being able to keep the forts alive because the towers aren't worth as much experience. That experience was put into the forts and the keeps. This may mean that they more easily can make it into the mid game when they start to have ultimate evolution, when they can get into the full team fights. Having that's going to be really interesting to get to watch.
One thing that we know K1 Pro to be famous for is his Jaina play. Jaina is one of the best clones. They got the ban in there before I could throw it in there. But it's very much prevalent in the meta. We see a lot of Genji. We see a lot of Jaina, especially in North America. But we haven't seen our Phoenix yet. We haven't seen Hanzo yet. Hanzo not as highly prioritized on this battleground, but he does have the boss potential. We've seen the nerf on his level 4, but it's still very, very strong. So a lot to consider here, and we know with Lutano definitely on that Hanzo role. We'll see if that still comes true here for Team Freedom.
I'm looking at what Simplicity has, and I'm thinking we're probably going to get Tiger JK's famous Karzim.
Yep.
Unless we start to see some attack speed slows, maybe a little bit more of dissuading of that, but a nice heads-up ban to take away Tracer. That is another Lutano hero, pairs very well with Malfurion, and good skirmishing, pulse bombs too. But that makes me think we're probably going to see Lutano move into the Hanzo, unless you're thinking anything else for him.
Yeah, the Hanzo, where we thought the nerf to his auto attack range was enough to keep him out of the meta, Midseason Brawl very much said no. He's still very much at the top of the game. You know, Phoenix is up there as well, so I think one of those two heroes likely to come out here. I'm just curious on the side of Simplicity, do they keep it standard with a Hanzo style, Phoenix style? But with Abathur being there on the side of Simplicity, that is generally Hostie's role, to play the Abathur, the Medivh, the Tassadar, and allowing K1 back over there. I haven't seen K1 on Hanzo because he's been playing support since Hanzo came out. So quite curious to see where K1's hero is going to come in.
Yep, K1. And, well, actually, K1 Pro did play some Abathur for a while. Though I still think we'll have Mule really like the stab build. And with top damage charts.
Sonya and Muradin both have self-healing capabilities. We are very much in a solo support Abathur meta, so there is still possibility here that
it's a Tiger JK Abathur?
You never know. Tiger does, because he's been playing in the open division at various points. He's known for playing support, but he's very much adept at playing other roles, so.
He was playing tank in the Crucible, so they've had 3 role swaps just to get where they are, which is something to keep in mind. Yes, these are players who are known for those roles, and they've had some time to adapt to that.
Yeah, we get it.
Yes.
Aiming. No Hanzo here.
Okay.
So Nasmus, very good at the ranged auto attack heroes back in the day. Phoenix seems like a likely choice for him, but again, we're rediscovering some of these teams between the role swaps, between some of the roster changes on other teams. So we get to see our first look at it. Is a Hanzo Phoenix a thing? We saw Phoenix Tassadar in some metas, but I don't think it's a Sky Temple style pick. So let's see if we get anything out of the ordinary. Medivh is still a thing, but that was Yoda's hero previously.
That's a fair point. Who plays Medivh now? Another point for Octalysis too, with Dansky no longer on the roster. But that's for another day. That's tomorrow. This last ranged pick will still be Hanzo. So I think it's likely that we see Nasmus play that Phoenix then.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Again, back in the day when I saw that, it was the auto attack heroes I think he really stood out on. So getting back to a similar role here with the role swaps, I think is a basic positive for Team Freedom. So very much looking forward to seeing how that plays out for Nasmus. The Li Ming, they don't have the consistent damage. I think Sonya is really how you're going to get at the Abathur hat.
Yeah.
But they are all in on those kills with that Kerosene.
Yeah, that's what concerns me with that Li Ming pick. I think it's fair to want to have Li Ming as another means of interrupting what could be a potential mosh pit, though Team Freedom on a big map, likely that we see stage dive too. But that would be the biggest concern for me is, are you going to be able to rely on getting those resets? What's the clone target going to be? Are you going to try to just double skill shot and hope that you can get the resets? Because then you also get the resets, and you have 20% increased ability power. It's just that I don't really know that I've seen very many Li Ming clones.
It's weird because last year, when we were still in the double sport meta, or even not during the double sport meta, you could clone the Rhaegar. And the Rhaegar was very strong because he dished out a little bit of damage, but also that extra healing. And I think Kerosene has potential there, but not so much. But then you look at Sonya. Sonya, a great clone target, I think, if you want to get and dive in there. And the Li Ming obviously is the big one. So we'll see the clone target there. But this feels familiar, Gilly, but it feels brand new. I'm loving where we're headed here.
As am I. So let's introduce our teams in the blue. This is Team Freedom Collusion's going to be playing Malfurion. Lutano will be playing Hanzo. Zugrug on ETC. And that's Nasmus playing Blaze, which means Yoda will be playing Phoenix.
Interesting. So despite the change, there still looks like there's some adaptation coming in here. But first, we'll look at Simplicity, as it will be Hosty. He will be on the Abathur. K1 Pro, back to that range role. Going to be on the Li Ming. King Caffeine, very familiar face. Going to be on Muradin. Tiger JK on Kerosene. And rounding it out will be Zuna. He's going to be on the Sonya.
All of those heroes for Simplicity strike so much nostalgia in my heart. It's crazy. Maybe not so much K1 Pro Li Ming instead of Jaina, but it's a K1 Pro mage anyway, so I'm still stoked. But you know, it is a little bit strange to see that Team Freedom has decided to keep with Nasmus on Blaze, though I feel like Blaze was his best. His Blaze was phenomenal during part 2, so I wonder if this is more a hero selection that they felt they needed to go into this. Actually, Yoda is going to solo lane as that Phoenix, so that's how we're going to see this happen. Very cool, very interesting.
We heard rumblings of this towards right after the season ended, right? Right after Phase 1 and before Midseason Brawl, was that a lot of teams started to adapt when they were scrimming. We started seeing things around, you could use Phoenix as a solo laner. Almost nobody can trade into Phoenix positively. He can just simply auto attack, keep everybody. Every other melee struggles against range generally, so you have to have self-heal. So it does fit the role. And I think later on we will see kind of that change, and you can manipulate that stuff. Team Freedom is not a team that comes into a large battleground without a plan, Gilly. So I am curious what their plan is. How are they going to play around the siege camp? How are they going to play around the night camp? It's something you and I discussed before today, is that with the XP distribution being different, will teams approach that top lane differently than we saw them before with the Knights?
Well, one thing that can be relied on is on Sky Temple, take down the towers and you get more efficacy out of the temples, because then they're attacking the far more valuable structures of forts. So regardless, Team Freedom's still focusing on having this early tri-lane toward the top. It gave them a tower. while Nasmus and Yoda converged from mid and bot to get their Giants there. That'll help them be able to go sort of into a 3-2, and these have been some really fluid, awesome rotations, but unfortunately, spreading themselves slightly too thin will result in First Blood going over to Simplicity.
Good body blocks there, a nice Abathur hat, and that's all she wrote is that is First Blood. Again, just the feel of this game in particular with this setup, you know, what we heard from Nasmus and the setup that we have here, you could see that they were forced to respond in the bot lane, and Collusion just overstepping a bit there, being punished for it.
Now we're a little bit out away, 45 seconds from our first Temple phase. And we're seeing Simplicity try to make sure that they're going to have their bruisers going during this, so that they have some good rotational space in between the top and mid. May also try to force out a response from that, but Team Freedom are doing the same.
I do like what Team Freedom's doing. One of my biggest qualms that I had with Team Freedom was the lack of frontline control towards the later part of Phase 1, is that they didn't have enough CC, they didn't have enough control over the frontline, and that's why teams could just literally aggress into them, dive past the melee, and execute on the backline. Here, running an ETC and a Blaze, a very different feel, and a much stronger feel, I think, here for Team Freedom in the early going, as we see Simplicity trying to take advantage of that spell armor, pushing in, but it's going to be met by Team Freedom's in return.
Yeah, Team Freedom has the timing advantage of being able to take these bruisers out underneath their fort, but Simplicity gets some start on the Temple toward the top and trying to equalize out the damage that was done there. But a very close game between these two teams, and I feel like that is showing a little bit of the amount of experience out of towers, and that was the plan, is taking out some of the experience from those fort towers, tries to keep the early game more even, and hopefully for simplicity's sake, that they're able to utilize that to get further on into the sweet spot of their composition quicker.
It does seem like there was still a focus in that top lane because nobody rotated mid. You could have easily sent somebody mid, but they have that focus. Phoenix being that solo laner, as you alluded to at the beginning of this, still putting pressure onto that Abathur in the bottom. Top finish there, and this mid only halfway channeled here by Simplicity. Remember, that Abathur means one less body, and Phoenix is rotated up. We might have ourselves a skirmish here over this mid lane, and I think for Simplicity's sake, they have to hold on to this. Well, they do have Mule Gilly, but this still takes down structures. That's the main thing.
Yeah, but the focus for Abathur comps often on Sky Temple is just to get a little bit of both temples, because then you can heal up the forts. I was scared that they weren't going to get enough from the top because they rotated out very quickly. They didn't want to deal with the skirmishing, but they also couldn't deal with the 5v4, 4.5 that you get from the symbiote. Suna, roots to follow up here. Caught, nicely done. That Mule, though, as long as Zuna was the focus and Zuna doesn't die, that Mule is healing up. So Simplicity keep all of their forts alive, but they are starting to fall behind in the experience just slightly.
They're going to move in. You can actually see them on the minimap while we keep things here on the bottom lane. It's something Tempo Storm definitely made sure that they took care of, is that if that Mule's going to come out, you have to confirm structures. Right. You cannot let them come back up. So a very concerted effort here by Team Freedom to make sure and take that down. I think that's very smart, very wise to commit to that. Don't let that heal back up. And now we're looking at a full level lead. Simplicity's got some work to do if they want to be level 10 before that next temple, or at least at the start of that, to be on even ground, because right now, Team Freedom starting to distance themselves in the early game.
Oh, a kill here would be absolutely perfect. Great stun, but Yoda warps out. Nick of time to survive. Simplicity rotated down, finally recognizing that Team Freedom were going to commit to getting that top fort. The problem was it was so slow of a siege, they only got a tower, and there's this, the issue is they lose a keep getting a tower, and that keeps them fairly behind Team Freedom. They still have 2 healthy forts, unless Team Freedom can get a lot done in this amount of time in the bottom lane with their heroic abilities.
Heroics on the horizon here, but Simplicity still looking to push back a little bit, at least in the few seconds that they have left. Actually see ETC on the minimap. Gilly, you mentioned this in the draft. You don't send the ETC up to the top lane unless you're going stage dive, so that's already locked in. Phoenix debating on whether he wants to go Planet Cracker or Salvo here. If you have a full dive composition and you can get some type of control on the front line, then Planet Cracker could have value because they will be clumped.
Yeah, even the support being melee is a thing. I was waiting for Team Freedom to move up to this boss. They have a lot of time to do whatever they want. They have the zone control vision off of the Sonic arrow that we saw there, so they're just going to work on getting this boss now. Actually,
we have a soft defense. King Caffeine has already used his warp toss. The power slide in, even going Pinball Wizard to make sure and get that extra damage on power slid targets when you use that face melt. So an easy pickup, easy kill there by Simplicity and Gilly. We do have Planet Cracker locked in.
So now we see kind of a double global of those backliners that you would say with the Dragon's Arrow and the Planet Cracker. If Yoda ends up being off on a temple, like we see here, or off somewhere else, trying to make sure that he can provide some damage to the already pretty good stun lock that we just saw between the jet propulsion and the power slide. Have to say, not all of Simplicity was there. I don't know if maybe King Caffeine thought he was going to be 10 faster and could avatar from that, but it's unfortunate to lose their tank just as that important heroic ability was met for Simplicity, and now they're finding themselves 2 levels behind in this game 1.
Well, Simplicity made a really good call there. They knew that the fort was under pressure from that temple. They were trying to get as much out of that mule as they could, making sure Team Freedom just couldn't walk in and take down another structure like they did in that top lane. Ended up thwarting them off, potentially looking for a fight there, but Team Freedom doing a very good job with the disengage. So now Simplicity, as you said, 2 levels down. They've got a lot of work to do because they will continue to be in that talent tier deficit.
Yes.
And here in a moment, we'll actually see where the next temple phase is. Best bet for them is if it's a single temple. If it's double temple, they're going to be dancing around whatever Team Freedom allows. And that's probably not going to be much.
The thing is, this is, and it's
Yeah.
all the way top and all the way bottom. The thing is this is where Team Freedom, old Team Freedom, throughout Phase 1 thrives, is being this far ahead. They are very good at being, knowing where their opponents want to be, what their win condition is, or their comeback condition is in this instance, and not being there, not allowing for those fights, and still being able to get a lot of macro pressure done. They use their opponent's biggest weaknesses against them.
This is exactly one of those, is that multiple members of Simplicity were in that bot lane. Oh, the Dragon Arrow comes in the flames from the bunker, help confirm the kill. Tiger JK falls in with the spell armor here. They have now, Simplicity's now been forced to bring everybody back. An entire keep wall has fallen, and Team Freedom is blowing this game wide open.
Simplicity do still have the soak off of the Abathur hat as a way of trying to get them back, but with this double temple activation phase now and ETC having the global of stage dive, this is going to be tricky for Simplicity for sure, because all of the forts being down, Team Freedom handling the mule from that very first fort exceptionally well, having some pressure with the camps too. They could trade out if they want to. They have that big of an experience advantage, but I expect that we're going to see them be able to work Simplicity out of getting or losing a lot of these shots.
Zuna actually made a good call there for a moment. Now going to hop on there. Didn't want to show initially where everyone was because now they don't have vision. And that was a very good rotation by Team Freedom to not path through the middle, not path through the eye. And it now shows, okay, we have no idea. Is ETC top? Is ETC going to be bottom? Now they've identified that Team Freedom is there, and this is why you use the global. Muradin and Kerosene, they have to get this kill instantly. They can't allow the stage dive to go through. So King Caffeine has to hold his stun. Stormbolt missed. And that's it. Zugrak now, just because that doesn't land, he can walk away. Now if he needed to, he also had stage dive because the interrupt just isn't there. So Team Freedom, they're making all the right plays, and Simplicity, they're struggling to keep up.
Simplicity have not been able to get a fight at all.
Planet Cracker.
And the Planet Crackers took out the Abathur. Rough going for Hosty and the rest of Simplicity.
The temple hitting there, I think, granted enough vision, and that is a very heads-up call against an Abathur. This is going from bad to worse for Simplicity.
(16-13), not much else to say. Team Freedom have been running this map, running Simplicity ragged in this game 1. But important to note that it is a Freedom favorite. It is playing exactly how they would want to on this battleground. But for Simplicity, what are you hoping from them to try to get back into this game?
Desperation boss call. That's really the only thing that you have, and I think Team Freedom is going to make that a non-option. They're holding here. At this point, the reason being is because if you're Team Freedom, the only way that you can really lose is to lose in a team fight, and the best way to do that is over the boss. And the boss, if you're on the side of Simplicity, it will get that bottom fort. It will unlikely get much more out of that keep wall. So there's just not a lot it can go. If you're Team Freedom, though, with a 3-level lead and a talent tier advantage, it might be a risk willing to take, but it's one you don't have to take. And I think that's going to be the main thing here. We will see Team Freedom keep an eye on it. Again, with Yoda up here, the minute he shows, we'll see if Simplicity takes the bait and tries to go in on this. But again, with no 16, I'm not feeling this call if I'm Team Freedom to defend.
Yoda clearing out bruisers in top, that was a hope for Simplicity. They didn't have to worry about the catapults there for a while. Also, the Avatar tried to help out with that. But they aren't taking it, they're just making sure that Freedom aren't on it, which is fair, because it's Hanzo, it's Scatter Arrow build, we know the power of it on a boss. But now, Simplicity, the thing they can hope for is, again, a separation on these temples, but I think with Simplicity getting this close and knowing what Simplicity want, I think we can expect that the minute that Simplicity shows, stage dive.
Well, one of the things that we see there is that King Caffeine used his Stormbolt to check the push. You always need to check the push, but when you have a Li Ming with magic missiles, that's one way to do it, because King Caffeine now has no CC for several seconds, and now that doesn't allow them, if they are split, to engage the same way. So I think that's a big mistake there, as we now see the clone is out. Hosty did clone the Karazim to give that bonus healing, but it's not going to help. They're actually going to have pressure on their core here in a second. Will Simplicity, they've got to take a fight right here, Gilly.
Yes, they do. There's a power slide. Nasmus and Zugberg have so much ridiculous amounts of control. That Twilight Dream has forced back Simplicity. Dragon's Arrow and Planet Cracker follow-up. Stage dive not even necessary as Li Ming falls, and that's the crux, that's the core of this composition. You're not going to get anywhere if you can't start to get those Li Ming resets. And look at the health bars of Team Freedom. There's really just not a target. Maybe Lutano, but he has the natural agility escape. It's the Li Ming. I'm not sure about that in the draft. I understand wanting it for the ETC, but with that tanky front line and a bunker, resets were just not gonna happen.
Bunker down, Malfurion hopping in, he's chilling, and the shields have fallen here for Simplicity. Still 5 seconds away for Li Ming, no clone available. Zuna, he's just going back for health, but this is gonna be game number 1, Team Freedom. They're gonna finish the job here. And Gilly, they did so in decisive fashion.
Things look good for Team Freedom. There was a lot of pressure on them throughout Phase 1 to do well. Went to the Western Clash and unfortunately dropped out of the Western Clash very quickly, even though there was a lot of hype behind them from both NA and from Europe in the teams that scrimmed them. And then the struggle through trying to make it back into the good graces through the playoffs. Nearly was able to win versus Octalysis, but lost in Game 5. So now this is a great start for them, winning Game 1 in such decisive fashion.
If you ever wondered what Team Freedom looks like, you could just show the damage screen. 22,000 hero damage was the tops of anybody in that game. There was only 5 kills on their side, 5-2. And that's how Team Freedom plays. But it is Sky Temple, where after you get that lead that we saw, it is very easy to avoid the team fight. When the boss was taken and then it was top-bottom temples, it's basically game over. I mean, the win probability for a team like Team Freedom at that point is somewhere near 99%. There's no coming back against the team with that type of, I guess, structure around the way that they like to play and with their macro sense. And against that composition, it was just a little bit too easy beyond that point. But again, that is Team Freedom's map pick. That is their play style that is very hard to play against.
Especially if you fall behind.
Yeah.
Like you don't fall behind against Team Freedom. That's about worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And especially on Sky Temple, where the objective does the work for you, my friends.
It was good. I mean, it was clean. That's if you're a Team Freedom fan, that's exactly the game that you want to see. The real test will come when they get to a battleground. We saw Simplicity when their backs were against the wall. They like to go to a map like Towers of Doom. Battlefield's banned, which is one of the best maps to fight on. Towers was their next one. It's like, well, you can't run because everything is right here in the middle of the map. So it will be something that if it does come, if they want to choose that. We know Simplicity oftentimes likes first pick, so a lot of times they give away map control, but when it does come, worst comes to worst, they do pick that battleground amongst others, but we'll see how that plays out.
Well, we took a look at the global leaderboard earlier for the HGC cheer program. Now let's take a closer look at the top teams in NA for who's been cheered for the most. And Heroes Hearth Esports Tempo Storm at the very top, quite a large margin, but of course that makes a ton of sense, those being the 2 teams that represented NA at the midseason Brawl J-How.
I mean, that's definitely a good way to get your name out there, and you can